Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy.
Hello and welcome. My name is Jacob Steele, the events manager for Banyan Books and Sound. Today we're delighted to be hosting Deborah MacNamara in conversation with Maria LeRose on Dr. MacNamara's new book, Nourished: Connection, Food, and Caring for Our Kids and Everyone Else We Love. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that although we have participants joining us from around the world for these online events, the physical location of Banyan Books is on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Donations to Banyan Books help support these programs to be free for all. Just click on the PayPal link in the YouTube show notes below to donate. For those in our live audience, Deborah MacNamara welcomes your questions. Please type questions into the chat box at any point during the event. And now for introductions. Deborah MacNamara, PhD, is a clinical counselor and educator with more than 25 years' experience. She's on faculty at the Neufeld Institute, operates a counseling practice, and speaks regularly about child and adolescent development to parents, childcare providers, educators, and mental health professionals. She's the author of the best-selling book, Rest, Play, Grow, the children's picture book, The Story Plane, and her new book, Nourished. Maria LeRose is an award-winning television producer and interviewer, and an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Medicine at UBC. She received her Master's of Education from UBC in the Department of Education and Counseling Psychology, with an emphasis on social and emotional development. Before embarking on a career in journalism, she coordinated the first child abuse prevention program in BC. She's a longtime advisor to the Dalai Lama Center and moderator of the DLC's Heart Mind conferences. Today, our guests will be in conversation about Dr. MacNamara's new book, Nourished: Connection, Food, and Caring for Our Kids and Everyone Else We Love. Dr. Gabor Mate has said of the book, Dr. MacNamara brings home the message that our responsibility as parents is not simply to feed our kids, but to nourish them, a task that depends on our nature-given capacity for relationality, for holding our kids emotionally long after we no longer need to hold them on our laps. In a society that alienates us from our innate caregiving instincts, its lessons could not be more urgent. And I agree with that. The book is available from Banyan. You can get it at banyan.com, and you can learn more about Deborah's work at macnamara.ca and about Maria's work at marialerose.com. It's a great honor to have both of them with us today. Please welcome Deborah MacNamara and Maria LeRose.
Thanks so much, Jacob. You're going to be able to sit back and enjoy.
Thank you.
And we'll see you back here in just a little bit. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, Maria. Lovely to see you.
You too. Before we start, I want to say, of course, hello to all of you who are here with us for this next hour. I'm just thinking that you're here because you've taken a look at this, even just a glimpse at it. And I know for me, just even reading the back, what does it mean to be nourished? Nothing could be more basic than food. However, food is only part of nourishment. I just read that part and wanted to read more, and I'm sure that you feel the same way. So Deborah's here, excited to tell you about her journey in creating the book, about stuff that's in the book, how she feels about it, and wants to know how you feel about it too. So at any point as you're listening to this conversation that you have an aha moment or a comment for Deborah, or a question even for Deborah about your own experience, please do just go to the comment section, write it in. We'll be watching that, and definitely we'll come back for the last 15 minutes and answer questions. Perhaps we'll jump to it sooner, but please feel like you're part of this conversation. We invite you to join us. So Deborah, this is big. This is the launch of one of your babies.
Yes, it is. It has felt very big after a long time of doing research and writing. Yeah. It's nice to be.
And it's been 10 years, right?
Yes, it has been. It's been a slow process, and taking my time with it because the kind of questions that I was asking or trying to overturn just seemed to is like kind of trying to bust some myths and just trying to get underneath it, turn it around 180 degrees to say it's not about the table and why are we asking about picky eating so much, and something's really come undone. So yeah, it's taken some time, or maybe I'm really slow, but it's taken.
No, I think it's because you're asking questions and exploring intersections that
Mhm,
haven't really been
mhm.
discussed before. That's what I felt when I was reading it, and I wonder why this book and why now.
Mhm. Well, a lot of people say things find them, projects find them, and this found me. And it came out of a lack as a parent, having two young kids and having one that was a very good eater, if you want to put it that way, good, and one who was more picky. And going to Gordon Neufeld, who was my postdoc supervisor, if you can imagine, that was my go-to person, was Gordon Neufeld. And I'm attachment based, theorist. I'm attachment based in my practice. And here I was trying to feed my daughter and having problems and creating a relationship problem.
Mm.
So I went with my tail between my legs and with some shame and said to Gordon, I'm struggling with my picky eater. Do you have any insight? And he basically wouldn't answer my question, which was a brilliant move on his part. I won't reveal what he said, but he turned me around. And what he was essentially saying to me is it's not about food. And it sent me on a quest. And as I started to look for answers, I realized that something had come undone. Here I was studying with someone who's one of the world's leading attachment theorists, developmentalist. And here I was doing this in my practice, helping family with relationship problems. And yet, when it came to temper tantrums, putting them to bed, yeah, I was doing this in the context of relationship. But in my feeding of my kid, it was coming undone. So it made me realize that something was broken. And I felt this urge and I felt this alarm that I had to figure that out.
Just describe that a little bit, because I think people who are with us tonight identify with that. I came undone when it was about eating. So maybe starting with yourself, can you remember what that felt like? Maybe
Mhm.
describe a scene.
Yeah. So, I would try to disguise food. She wouldn't eat meat. So I was putting it and burying it in the rice, which I knew she liked. And then I would, give it to her. And then I remember her wincing and then looking at me like, what are you doing? What are you feeding me? And it wasn't about the food anymore. It was about trust. I was being sneaky. I was trying to ram things, into her to get her to try things. And it was like she would look at me like, what are you doing? And spit out food. She was only 3, 2.5 to 3. But there was this sense of something's not right between us. And I grew alarmed and she grew more resistant. And then I
Mhm.
panicked because my tricks weren't working anymore. And that's when then I went to Gordon.
And I guess there are all kinds of reasons we become alarmed.
Hmm.
I'm thinking when that ever happened to me, part of me was worried that they'd never eat again. Where did that come from? And
Hmm.
part of me was worried that I had lost control somehow. I mean,
Hmm.
it's complicated, isn't it, Deborah? That feeling that we get when what we're offering, and by the way of food to our children, isn't being taken in.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing more close to our provider instincts. We know attachment's important, but what comes right with that, right on top of it, is we got to keep them alive.
Mhm.
And food and safety is so close to it. Now, attachment comes first, but it's so intertwined that when we fail to provide this way, all of the innate instincts start going, the alarm, the frustration, the pursuit, because it is so close to survival. We can't get this wrong. So of course we get stirred up.
So whether we get it right or get it wrong, we're actually not impacting as much what they're eating as we are impacting their relationship with us.
Yes, and with food, but yeah, with us, that comes first. And so because we have to show up so often to feed, I mean, their tummies run out, they get hungry. And so we are doing this 2 to 3 times a day. How we're showing up around feeding, it's not about food actually. It's about this dance of relationship and what gets enacted around food, the most primal thing we could take care of. It sets us in place. It sets us on a dance and a trajectory. But we don't talk about that. We talk about the food, we talk about nutrition, we talk about what's in the food, we talk about lots of stuff. And so it's like this divorce has happened where we don't understand feeding is ultimately a caretaking dance and relationship.
Are you saying that that's changed over time? That something in our culture has changed?
Yeah, we've lost our way with our food. Our culture used to preserve our food ways. It used to ingrain in it relationality and how we had to gather, prepare. We had to rely on each other this way. We had the industrialization of food. We've had, behavioral approaches to, how much do you eat? Measure it. We've had this expansive knowledge about food itself and nutritionism. Nutrition's important. But everybody who says, who works in the food area says any problems with food actually aren't about food. The solutions don't lie in the food. They actually lie in the relationship that we have to the people who feed us and who take care of us. So no, something has become terribly undone here when feeding is no longer an act of caretaking.
So interesting, because when you started on this journey of writing this book and thinking more about this topic, um, I don't know that you realized how urgent it was. It sounds to me like as you moved through the process, you were like, this is got to be told. We need to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I began thinking it was about the food. That was my question to Gordon. How do I get the food into her? And this book and this research transformed me. Listening to stories, listening to what parents were talking about, it absolutely changed me from the inside out. But without an understanding of human emotion, understanding of the significance of play, understanding the science of attachment, how we're meant to develop, I don't think without Gordon Neufeld's work, I could not have put these pieces together. It was only because I was embedded in this that I could find my way back to what I think is broken in this.
So most of us don't have any knowledge about all those things you listed. So we're relying on you as our guide. And so I wonder, when you put this book down now, when you look at it, what is your hope for us who are reading it?
Yeah, my hope is, and the reason why I tell stories instead of just drilling in the research and the science, and the way that I thought was important to tell the story instead of telling what to do, is because these instincts to take care of our loved ones are in us. No one has to give these to us. It's like sort of pointing our way home. And that's what this book felt very much like for me. It's about how I found my way home, how I found my way back to the provider instincts that needed to guide everything I do, not just feeding. And I hoped as I was writing that in the stories that I tell of parents and how food and relationship comes together or has come apart, that we could each find our own story in that and find our own way back to this place where things came together and weren't so separate. So that was
Yeah.
my yearning.
Yeah, I think just for myself, I think you've succeeded in doing that, in helping me understand more about what's really happening. And I think people who are with us tonight
Thank you.
must have felt that way too, otherwise they wouldn't be joining us tonight. So I think you've accomplished that. And just now to get more concrete about that, because what you're talking about is unless we give some real examples and talk about some specifics, it feels like it could leave you feeling kind of guilty and worried. Right? I mean, this is something that you don't want people to feel.
Yeah, with my daughter, Yeah, it's interesting because I think what happens is that it's really easy to go down the path of nutrition and, good eating habits. But, as I think about one of my daughters away at university right now, calling me at 10:30 at night and saying, "Mom, I'm hungry." And why is she hungry? Because she's stressed out. She's got exams. She didn't eat her dinner because her stomach was upset. But 10:30 at night, she's calling for food, much like the child, when you put them to bed way back in the day. I'm hungry. I need a glass of water. And you're like, what? And it's not really about that. It's about seeking contact and closeness with food as an instrument of that connection. So I went and I picked her up and I got her. I said, well, it's just going to be whatever food's available, and picked her up and, touch base with her, fed her, and drove her back. But it wasn't about the food necessarily. It was about that bridge that food provides between us so that we can find a return home. We can anchor in, we can find a place of rest, a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. And so, yeah, are they really asking for food? Are they really asking for water? What are they really asking for here?
That's the tricky part. Who knows, and who knows what to do? And especially, you mentioned picky eaters, and I Googled picky eaters, and there was 11,900,000 hits. And I didn't look at 11,000, I didn't look at 12 million hits, but I did just do, looked at, kind of checked, and almost all of those hits were tips on how to help your picky eater eat food. And you just mentioned the trick that you used. I always ground vegetables up into everything that they had, right? So it was that same anxiety and alarm about feeding them. But let's stay with picky eaters for a minute, because that's one that people really can relate to. Many people can relate to. You said
Mhm.
it's not really about the food. So walk me through that. Here you have a child who uh, the food is in front of them. Doesn't matter what age they are, I don't think, but let's say they're young.
Mhm.
The food is in front of them and they won't eat it.
Yeah.
So help me and help all of us who are here with you
Mhm.
reframe that scene.
Yeah. So the instinct inside of us, because we're alarmed, is to just try one piece, just have it. You'll like it. You get the coercion, you get the pushing. Now, when we're pushing, what does that create inside of a child? Fear, alarm, discomfort. There's disconnection between us, but that's our alarm is does the pushing. But if we understood that that child actually has a bias to eat, wants to try actually new things, what makes them receptive to that? Well, an environment that is not full of coercion, an environment where they see, Nona is eating blueberries. What is that? Oh, but Nona likes it. They don't
I'm
know.
Nona, by the way.
Yeah, sorry. They you
Not to
know,
tell people.
yeah, if, Nona likes it, it's a strange looking blue
Mhm.
thing, but if Nona likes it and I like Nona and I love Nona, I trust Nona, then I'll want to eat like Nona. Um, they do have shyness instincts that appear very strongly. And so, they're trying to get to know about the world of food. What we know is food, they don't know yet. And so they have to have some autonomy around it. They have to do that in the context of play where there isn't pushing, so they can come into being an eater and not simply being fed. They have innate sensitivities and a chemical sensing system, taste, touch, smell. We don't know what that's like. The table is a very provocative place. There's lots going on at a table. We need to slow down and let them enter into it. And if you know any 2 or 3-year-old, they're full of, I do it myself and me do. And, as soon as it's your idea, then it's like, oh my goodness, they back up. The one interesting study that I found, and it was just so beautiful, was by a researcher by the name of Paul Rosen. And he said there's something that happens magically between the ages of 2 and 5 in Mexico, where the children at 2 do not eat the hot spices and chili peppers. They're just like, oh, it's awful. But by 5, something magical is happening where they're eating the same as their family members. We don't know how that happens, but we know it's around the table where they see people enjoying the hot chili peppers. You don't need to teach this. You need to be embedded in context that's safe, caring. You're attached to your caretakers. If they're enjoying their food, you will warm up to these things. You will want to be like them. So when we get into battles around food, we dig in separation, We dig in detachment, and we cannot lead them. They're not receptive at that point.
So interesting, because another thing that might go through our head is we can't let them get their way. They
Yeah.
can't be in control here. So there's this thing about control,
Yeah.
dependence versus independence, control versus. Can you speak to those of us who have that instinct?
Yeah. Well, we should want to be in the lead. I mean, there's that, those are instincts to provide. But what we can never forget is that relationship is a two-way street. You can't just lead, you can try to lead someone through coercion, but that won't get you very far. You just need a bigger stick, need something bigger to hold over somebody's heads. And that's not trust. That's fear. So what do we have to our avail? We have human connection, where that child wants to be like us, is influenced by us. But what does that require? It requires an invitation from us. It requires a warm invitation, that desire and that yearning to take care of them. But they must also trust us and take us up on our offer. So it's like a dance. You can't dance by yourself. You need to have a trusting, caring relationship where that child wants to follow you. Why do they want to follow you? Because you're safe, kind, caring, attached, and attachment is that glue that makes them want to come to our side, be like us, want to be significant to us. So we've got to push into those instincts rather than push them away from us and try to control. Lead, yes. Control, no, that doesn't work.
So just to be clear about this, because I don't think what you're saying is that a child who is picky eater isn't well attached.
No.
No.
I think,
Okay. So we need so talk about that. That
yeah.
You're thinking about it because they are picky doesn't mean that you're doing it all wrong. So this is this is a nuance. It's really important for us to understand.
No, it is important to tease it apart. My daughter was picky because her chemical sensing system was through the roof. Then I created a relational problem and a context problem on top of that because I didn't understand her. So then I started pushing food. When I stepped back and stepped into relationship and the environment became more palatable for her, it wasn't fraught with arguments. She could eat what she wanted. She ate chicken nuggets for a while, I have to be honest. But then she saw us all enjoying butter chicken and she smelled butter chicken. How many times did she smell butter chicken? And it was associated with comfort. Then she came to know it. One of the interesting pieces of research I found is that kids with the strongest shyness instincts also have the most challenges in terms of what we would call pickiness and reticence, because shyness is part of the attachment repertoire. We only feel safe when we are connected and it's safe and caring in the environment. Then we feel safe to enter into it. Some of us have kids that are incredibly shy. We didn't create that. They come with that. So it means we have to go a little slower. We have to really make sure we're using connection. But they don't know about the world of food. They're coming to know it. So, if it was in culture, then we would just understand that they were just learning about it and that they would do this in the context of relationship. We would introduce their food as a gift.
And that one child is different from another, and they just are because of a whole bunch of things. And you as a parent, I think understanding what you're saying is so important, because maybe when we're in that moment with our child or grandchild where they won't take what we're offering and whatever emotion that brings up in us, that maybe I know after reading your book, it makes me just at least take a beat and not do what I'd ordinarily do. And I don't know what to do actually exactly, but I would take a beat now and say, this isn't about this. So it takes time, right, Deborah? It's not like somebody's going to tomorrow after hearing you talk, do it right and differently. It takes time.
Yeah. And I think it's exactly that. It's about finding our way back to make food associated with positive emotions again. It's about finding our way back to make it about an invitation, to make seeing food as a gift, and enjoy your food and eat the same food. And, if they won't eat it, share your delight of it, not in a coercive way, but just enjoy food as the gift that it is. But if we're worried about what's in the food, if it's clean or bad or good, then my goodness, there's so much alarm. Food isn't a gift when we are so full of those emotions. So enjoy it, make it as positive as you can, get away from the table. If the table is a place of conflict, you don't have to eat at a table. There's no magic in the table. The magic has always been you. So, just find another place to do that.
I know that you did a lot of interviews. That's part of the beauty of this book, is you certainly looked at what the experts had to say and what the research, you've referred to some of the research, really fascinating research, by the way, that you found. But you also talked to a lot of people about their own experiences. And I think it's worth sharing, a story maybe where there was one story in particular where a mother, just to tell us that there is room for repair, that there is a way to turn it around. And there was the one mother in particular, I think, who might have been one of your clients or your patients, and she made a real change in her relationship, her son's relationship with food, and her relationship with her son. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, is it the one with the quesadilla? Yeah. So this was so interesting. It was when I was first just trying to understand this relationship between food and relationship and how it came together. And I asked them, there was some separation and some challenges in the relationship. And I said, "Do you feed your son?" And no, we don't. And I said, "Well, would you try to prepare something for him? Let's see if he's willing to take it and what the uptake is." And she didn't know how to cook, really. And so they had a food service. And so she brought in, she made a quesadilla. And she said it was incredible because he just ate it like he'd been starving, and he wanted another one. And she said it was burnt, it wasn't well done, and he was starving for it. Conversely, her husband made him a favorite soup that was passed on from grandparents, and he wouldn't have anything to do with the soup. He didn't want to have anything to do with making it. And I could see that in this dance of relationship, he was receptive to mom's invitation for care, and he wasn't with dad. The wounding was so great with dad, and it was orchestrated through food. And so within 2 sessions, we already had a roadmap for how we needed to do repair, how we needed to move in, what was not coming, how mom could play the matchmaker to dad, how dad could take the lead. And it was all through this orchestration of feeding, where there was no words exchanged. It was just the uptake. Who was he receptive to and who was he not? It was incredible, incredible.
And I think that what you just talked about was somebody who had your guidance. You were holding their hands through it, and they were very fortunate. But my thinking after I read your book was that it's more about an aha, an insight about food and relationship. That's the important thing here, that the strategies, there are actually a lot of stories of people with all kinds of examples of this with their families that people can find as a guide. But most important is probably just that insight. Do you think?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the things about the food area is that you get really happy people and chefs and family meals and everything's great and Instagram feeds and it's all like this happy, happy. And then the reality is when you talk to parents and the reality of feeding kids and busy parents, there's a lot of challenges and it's heartbreaking, really. Allergies to just battles around the table. You're trying to put on a family meal. You're busy. It's stressful. And so, but nothing really pulls it together. And so I think what I hope is that people will find themselves in this story for good, bad, and ugly, and that there's hope for all of us in this. That it's not about having to have home cooked meals all the time or being the greatest chef. You don't even have to love cooking. You could buy the rotisserie chicken and feed your family. What comes first is attachment. It's relationship. When it comes down to it at the end of the day, you don't have to love any of those things. You just have to love the people that you're taking care of. And so, Gordon Neufeld, he said there's redemption here, which I thought was a very powerful word, but finding our way back home without the heavy weight of a prescription of it has to look like Leave It to Beaver or whatever back in the day, right? No, we can invite our children to be dependent on us when it comes to feeding. And it can look like as simple as having a cup of coffee with them as they're eating their cereal. It's about remembering that food is secondary to connection and to put that connection first. So I think it's doable. I think it's refreshing. I think it frees us up from so much of the angst around food by realizing we can do connection. We're wired for this. We can do connection. I'm not sure I'm wired for cooking, but I know I can do connection, right?
Yeah, I had a moment this afternoon with my 2-year-old granddaughter. We were on FaceTime together, and she had just come home, and so she was having a snack. She was having Cheerios and milk, which is your latest favorite thing. And I kept thinking about what I was reading in your book, about the opportunity there, that the Cheerio and milk was actually the vehicle for connection. And in some ways it enhanced the connection because she didn't have to just look into a screen and look at Nona and listen to Nona talking. We interacted around the cereal. And so there's something about that too. And in your book, you talk about that as food as I don't know that you use the word vehicle. It's a
good word for it. A medium, a vehicle. Great word.
A medium. Yeah. So that idea about, we don't automatically figure out how to handle the picky eater, but if in every scenario we're in where we pay attention to what you've said in the book about the opportunity that food presents to us, because what you said earlier too about Instagram, I think that puts a lot of fear in our hearts because we don't make the food like that. We don't know for a 2-year-old the exact thing that we should be putting together for a 2-year-old. That's probably part of the problem, things like that.
Oh yeah, so much pressure, so much shaming, so much judgment. And, I just was always in envy of those, beautiful lunch bento boxes and things like this. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is not me. One of the most beautiful pieces of research or hopeful pieces of research I found was by Gray. I believe his last name is Gray. Is that if you are attached to the person who feeds you, and you believe it comes with caring intentions, that it can change the taste, the subjective taste of the food. And people said this to me over and over again. My grandma wasn't a great cook, and she sometimes left out ingredients, or my mother burned a lot of stuff, and she was not the best cook. But I always felt taken care of, and the food tasted good. It's like, our perception of being cared for makes food taste better. When you see the wiring, you're like, nature intended this to be an act of care. It's profound.
Yeah, I can just really hear you're trying to remove some of that high anxiety about all of that we're from the competition or the comparisons that we see about food, and just really think about what is this about.
Yeah.
And sometimes they feed us, little children want to cook something and make it for you in make believe, right? And pretend when you're playing, there's probably something in there as well around them nourishing.
Yeah. It's one of the places where you see those first caretaking instincts come to light, is that little child that starts to feed others. And we think that they're imitating us and just copying us. But actually, it's much more profound. It's because they've been cared for, they now are moved, those attachment instincts are moved to take care of somebody else. And the first place that it appears is to feed. It just comes out to feed. It's the most natural thing in the world, is this invitation to care for through food. And it's just this beautiful expression of what nature hardwired us to do, which is to take care of each other and to glue us together with these beautiful attachment instincts so we can survive. That's what it's all about.
When you were talking about that story of the grandparents' food, the grandma's or grandfather's food not being great, but it was so delicious, to them, it made me think about each adult that comes to this equation. So the equation that we've been talking about so far is the parent and the child, the grandparent, the adult and the child. Each adult comes with their own story about food as well.
Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about that, and how do we factor that in to the repair around all of this?
Yeah. Well, every expert that I talked to that works in the eating area said in North America, we all have some sort of eating issue, whether it's because of diet culture, being alarmed about our food, or, obsessed about it, or whatever it might be, health conditions around it, that we each come to it now because of our broken food culture. We each now come with our own stuff. It's emotionally provocative for all of us now. So when I talk to parents, they said, this is my food history. I don't want it to be my kids. I've had eating disorder, or I've struggled with food. I don't want my kids to have body image. I want them to be healthy, and I want to provide for them. And it was so interesting to see how their provider instincts wrestled with those emotions to deliver something so different for their children, because there was such an understanding where there were food issues, that I don't want my kids to have to do this. And so, it was phenomenal having children, just that transformation and that struggle and that adaptation. A parent with a child with food allergies and anaphylaxis, like really hard issues for parents. But my goodness, do you ever see the resiliency, the adaptation, and how love and care for your child pushes you right up against the wall? So you have to figure it out. And I can tell you the stories of parents that they shared with me. If you've never had those kind of food challenges for yourself, you understand what love does to you in terms of turning you into the caretaker your children needs. It's an act of courage, a bravery. It's an act of great love.
Yeah. For me, for sure, I was in our trailer last week and reading your book, and I continually turned to my husband and kept engaging him in conversations about himself, to reflect on. They raised questions for me that I was interested in about him, really interested in about myself, my own thinking, for the first time about certain aspects of eating and relationship. And so again, you mentioned people who are at a place where they're in therapy, but this book also, for anybody, I think, would open up those conversations with someone who they love and someone who they feel safe with, and those conversations are probably useful.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've heard from people that read it, just like you said, is it feels provocative, but in a good way. It feels challenging, but in a good way, that we have to put some language. Well, what has been lost here? What does feel broken? What was my own relationship? And as I wrote the book, I was reflecting on my relationship with food, my relationship with my daughter, what brought me comfort as a child with food. And, why did I start making pies when my daughter was about to be born, and I'm making meat pies, and my husband's like, why are you making meat pies? We don't even eat meat pies. And I'm like, well, we need it for when the
We
baby's
will
born.
now.
And I'm just like, exactly. And he's like, I don't like meat pies. And the baby doesn't have any teeth. So what are you doing? Stop, mad woman. You're like making pies for the freezer. But pies were my comfort food. Meat pies were I remember them so fondly, being connected to my mother with these pies that she made. So why, in a time when I was becoming a mother and nesting as it was, that I turned to create the very comfort food that brought me comfort as a child? It wasn't conscious. It was very unconscious. And so you see how all of these emotions get tied up with food. And I think it brings the richness of that, the things that are invisible that we don't see, but we just enact. And it kind of just calls our attention to it and says, hey, we're playing at relationship and emotions here through our feeding and eating practices. What is this about? Why will you have a drink with some people and a dinner with another, and only a coffee with another person over here? What is that about?
What is it about?
It's about vulnerability. It's about how close, eating. There's a quote I say in the book is, eating, having a drink is for strangers. When you get closer, it's a meal, and family. It's this beautiful invitation for relationship, of bringing someone closer when you share the vulnerability of a meal, because you're sharing an experience, and the food is symbolic of that togetherness if it's a vulnerable situation for you.
You just brought a whole new meaning to comfort food.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I was always thought about comfort food as, macaroni and cheese, which would be one of mine. That's just a personal, just me, right? But I think I heard you say that when somebody else's comfort food, when you offer them their comfort food, I just had this aha about that's more than just giving them something they like. It's relational.
Yeah, comfort food was strongly connected to the emotions that you felt about a particular relationship. I tell a story in there that a psychologist had given me about a client who had just found out she had a cancer, and was facing a horrible diagnosis. And her client found herself going to the store and eating a particular candy that was associated with her mother giving it to her as a child. And she just ate it and didn't understand what this urge was to find comfort. But she was searching for that hand, that fed her in a time when she needed to be taken care of most of all, but she found it through food. So yes, it's so intertwined together, and so can discomfort. Some food may be comforting for one and completely full of discomfort for another, because the conditions in which it was served or delivered were anything but relationally friendly and provocative emotionally.
And I think I began by asking you about the adult's own experience with food. And I think you've had many experiences with people and heard stories about people who were able to make clear to themselves, understand more what their relationships, how their relationship with food was related to the relationship with people. And they were able to be different with their children.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's because you have children that the growth is possible. Because I don't think you can do this in isolation with yourself. Like this whole idea of, self-care. Yes, I get that. I don't totally disagree with it, but I think there's something profound and something that is unlocked in these provider instincts, in this caretaking, these attachments, this yearning to take care of somebody that is so fulfilling when you can land it, that it draws something different out of you, and a different relationship with food and being the provider.
Yeah, I think about friends of mine too who are that way with me. They want to make sure, because I don't always eat. I forget to eat. That's a whole other thing. You could do some therapy with me on that, but we won't do that right now. I just forget to eat. And there's some friends who have that nurturing thing that you're talking about, and it's not towards a child. It's towards me, and I feel it and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So in your cover of your book, you say, and everybody else we love, connection, food, and caring for our kids. And I just want to say that I don't think this is exclusive of the parent-child, grandparent-child relationship. There are a lot of relationships where food is central to that love and that attempt to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband works in the hospitality and restaurant business. And so his reflection after reading the book was, I got to get the chef out of the kitchen. I got to get him out there with people so they can see who's caring for them behind the scenes, because it's that care that makes that food taste better, and they can actually attach it. It's not a depersonalized or detached situation. There's a whole host of people behind the scenes who care deeply about their customers, and yet the chef is lost on the food, he said.
That's a really interesting idea. Let us know how that goes.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's convinced everyone of that yet, but it's a
that's because they haven't read your book yet.
Yeah. But think about the restaurants that get the top reviews. Think about the ones. It's not necessarily the fancy stuff. It's like the mom and pop shops who are, feeding, and there's this sense of relationality and of feeling taken care of. And why are those restaurants the ones that are doing so well? Someone sent me a note and said, "Oh, after reading your book, I understand now why the restaurant called The Angry Chef went out of business."
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I think I get that too.
Totally. That was a very subliminal kind of message to the eaters there.
Exactly.
And so you're talking about restaurants, but also there are lots of places in our society where we're feeding food to people who sometimes are for example, in schools or in assisted living situations. Food banks, and there are a lot of situations where food is being provided. Are there implications for those kinds of programs too?
Oh, I think so, because I think the focus has always been on the food in these situations, right? And the programs that have food attached to them, they're always the most popular programs. And yet when there's budget cuts, we say cut the food. And yet it feels like something has gone, something meaningful is missing from this gathering. It's like this a stamp on the relationship. It's a stamp on the gathering that says we are coming together around the food. But how do we feed our kids in school? It's not just about the food to have energy to study. It's about the context in which they eat. It's about who are they eating with? Is there emotional safety there? Yes, you're in a care home, but do you feel cared for? Is caring a service that you deliver as sort of a role, or is it actually an emotion? Like in a care home, just because you call it a care home doesn't mean someone feels taken care of. People always complain about institutional food. I would argue it's not just about the nature of the food. It's about the depersonalized, detached form in which the food is delivered. We don't know our caretakers.
It's really interesting. Do you know the other thing that just came to me when I said food bank is I heard a statistic the other day that 1 in 5 families in our province
Yeah.
are not able to find enough food for their own families, and so earlier you said it's not about the food and it's not about the table, and I think there's a message in that too for all of those people who find themselves in that situation.
Yeah, I think we have to bring dignity to that delivery of food, especially for families. There was one beautiful example up in Haida Gwaii when COVID hit, and this one school has a greenhouse, and they feed their community. They feed the kids from the greenhouse, and the grandparents come in and they feed. They make the food and they feed it. But they had all this food, and they didn't know what to do during COVID, and they knew families needed it, and so they got together and they pulled all the food resources. Everybody donated food and brought the food together. They sorted through it, and they went and they gave the food to the caretakers in each home and said, here. So the caretakers could then feed their family.
Wow.
So it preserved the nature of the relationship as the caretaker being the answer. Now, the caretakers needed help, but we don't need to share that with the kids who are looking to their parents to be the answer here. How do we do this? And I think about, one of my sisters works with a food truck and serves food for people and distributes it. And the dignity, the integrity, the relationship people show up for. They don't just show up for food. They show up to be gathered. They showed up to feel they matter, to have a conversation, to get resources. Yeah, the food is important. It's necessary. But there's such an honoring of the relational piece that must also come with it. Because otherwise food becomes fuel. We become machines. It becomes depersonalized. It's always meant to be given with relationship here. And that's what makes it feel much more humane, quite frankly.
And that's such a moving story about that community, the Indigenous community, where, if I understand correctly, it also was young people who were doing the growing and the sharing.
Yeah.
So if you can just think of relationships all the way down that chain,
Exactly.
around food, and also just that I got a sense for the person in the home where the food was being delivered. Wouldn't you feel like your community had your back?
Exactly.
And because it's food,
Yeah.
it's even, I don't know, it seems even more essential.
Yeah, it is. And what that does in terms of human resilience and feeling connected to a community and buying and getting you through a hard time. It's I'm not alone. I mean, that's the essential question for all of us is, am I cared for? Am I part of cascading care? Is there someone out there that I belong to? So, and
Is
being
that the
food
term cascading care? What is
yeah,
that? You mean what I
yeah. Yeah, it's that beautiful cascading care, and nature gives to us her plants. We, do this. We also give back to nature. We take care of nature. She rewards us with these gifts of food, but then we share it. We don't take more than we need, and this beautiful reciprocal arrangement where we are in relationship with food as a gift to our ancestors, to our land, to our animals, to each other, and that is nature's plan for us. But we have come so far from that, those her wishes for us this way.
You spoke with a lot of First Nations people or about First Peoples' way of seeing things, way of seeing food. It sounds like you learned a lot from those conversations.
I was invited into many communities and asked permission to share other stories that they gave me. And, one of them is when I did work with our Squamish peoples and had a ceremony, right? Like I had done a presentation, and then there was the rituals that I was invited to into for lunchtime, and the blessings over the food, and how I was an honored guest, and the song they sang. And I just felt, by the time the food came, I felt full already. And I felt full because there was such a beautiful invitation. There was ritual around food. There was a sense it was a gift, and it was the cherry on the ice cream because the richness was from the relationship. But my goodness, like we don't slow down to eat. We're on the run. There's no ritual. There's no gathering this way. There's no reflection. It's not a place of rest. It's food is fuel. Throw it in so you can go get back to work. We need to rest. And food was meant to be part of that. But we don't honor those rituals that way. We don't have rituals that protect food this way.
We need to rest. And I was thinking about that when I was eating my lunch while I was working at my laptop today. I'm thinking, note to self, I think this is what Deborah meant by rest.
Yeah,
Don't do this.
Yeah, actually, you know, it's funny because I was eating lunch today, and one of my sisters called me right as I was eating lunch, and she said, "Oh," because I was thinking, "Oh God, I don't want to look at my phone. I'm eating lunch. I need to be in connection, but I'm all alone." And then one of my sisters called, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry if you're eating lunch." I'm like, "No, this is perfect. I needed to eat with someone, so I hope you don't mind."
Oh, that's good.
It was perfect.
You have that new habit of mind now where you're going to turn it all around. So it is about relationships. You know, when you were saying too about the idea that I think certainly in my family, the Italian side of my family, food was a big gift. It was an offering that was significant. Whatever it was, we knew that it meant more than just the food. And as a professional, when I would do television documentaries and go into people's homes, they often offer you, of course, offer you food and some. And I noticed that some people were able to say, no, I'm all good. And I had this strong feeling of, I can't say no. This is an offering. It was so much more, it meant so much more to me when they were saying, would you like a cup of coffee? Who knows what it meant to them, but to me it was like, this is somebody offering their relationship, right?
Exactly.
Through coffee. So that's an example of an insight that we can have about what our experience was.
Yeah.
We have a question that just came in, and what I was just going to say, Deborah, is that interesting you have found with this book more than other, say, parenting books, is that there aren't often a flood of questions. It's different in that way, isn't it?
It's very different. I think it turns us inward. It turns us inward to our stories, to our emotions, to our relationships, because it gets to something so primal. Relationship and food, there isn't anything that we need more for survival than the pairing of these. And because we weren't ever meant to look at this, culture was meant to take care of it because it has come undone. It was meant to be invisible, and now we're shining a light on it. It's like, oh, now I have to look at this. And I think it stirs us up. It certainly stirred me up, and I had 10 years to sit with it. And, you know, I had time with it. So, it's okay. It's okay that it
I'd
does that.
love to know from people who are there if it is, you don't need to write anything, but I would be interested with a thumb up even. Is some of this resonating with you, or is it making you think about your own experiences with food? And you know, just give us a thumbs up if you feel like it. But I just want to say that thank you to Jen Lee, who just sent a message saying the old saying, rest and digest. There are a lot of GI issues from hurrying and not being present with your vital force, the food. So that's
Absolutely.
such an awesome thing to remind all of us of, but especially me, Jen Lee. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's very true.
So I mean, I know that you got very interested in that whole the gut, the brain, emotion, and there's no way we have enough time here to do that. But what Jen Lee's saying about GI issues isn't just about the food.
No, and they said in the literature, it says gastroenterology, enterologists who work in the field now have said it's not about the functioning of the body. We have to look at the emotional piece now, that they know their field, and what is coming forward is not simply about the food and the functioning of the body. It's about the emotional piece. It is the second leading issue for visits to the hospital is gut issues in North America. It's fascinating. And if you think it's not all about food, it's not all about the functioning of the gut, then you realize we're in distress emotionally, and yet the body doesn't work. And then, of course, it's all tied together. You can't separate body, heart, mind. It's all meant to flow together.
So interesting. Generally, thanks for that reminder, and thank you for letting us know that you're appreciating this conversation. Also, Mary Yvonne. I was earlier, I mentioned that I had conversations in the trailer with my husband about this book, but you make that really easy for all of us, because in the back of the book, I'm not sure why you did this, but I'm sure glad you did. you offered questions that we could ask ourselves or ask others, book club questions. I guess that's pretty common, but I loved your questions. And what were you thinking when you did that? What were you hoping?
I was hoping that it would help highlight the message that I wanted delivered in each particular chapter, and that it would help create reflection, dialogue, and invite people to find their own answers. Because I think in this area, there's far too many prescriptions for how it should look. And those prescriptions prevent us from getting where we need to go. It's not even, can't do that. It's not possible. And there's too much guilt and shame around it. And I just wanted to come back and talk about food in a way that celebrates it, it's a gift, that doesn't ignore the problems that is there with it, but is an invitation to say, hey, we can figure this out. We can find our way back, but just let's be patient and sit with some of the questions we need to. We'll find our way. So that was the hope anyway.
Yeah, it works. And I also think that it's probably a book where I might read a chapter at a time and then, pardon the pun, but digest it. And then come back to the book, maybe look at those questions, come back to the book again. It sounds like hard work, but it's hard work either way. Either you do the work and you have a better relationship with food and relationships, or you don't do the work and you struggle with those things. So that's a real gift that you've given all of us by coming up with those questions. We have about 4 minutes left, Deborah, and I'm just going to be quiet for a little bit and just let you have the final words here about what are the main takeaways for you from the research you did. There's a question. Any advice for early childhood educators bringing these ideas into our work? Maybe you can fold that in. Thank you for the question. Into your final comments. I'll just step away now.
Well, thank you. I've appreciated your reflection, your insights, and bringing it to concrete places as well, because it has to tie into that. If there's no utility in the home, in childcare settings, and in schools, then it's an intellectual exercise at best. So what are the messages for how we take this into our lives? If you're a childcare provider in the home, Gordon Neufeld is always very good at distilling things into the essence. And so what is the essence here? And there were 3 things that I sort of landed on. Number 1 is that an understanding from all levels, from the gut to the heart, to the brain, to mind, body connection, that food serves us best when it serves togetherness. That its ultimate purpose is to be a medium, a way of expression for a caretaking, that togetherness is enhanced because our stomachs run out of food and we need to gather. That, we come to the table not just for food, but for connection. And we do need that connection. We have separation in our days, but we need to come back for connection. Separation and then connection. And because we are a species this way that needs each other to emotionally survive, we're lucky that we have this food that can serve our togetherness.
And just to say quickly, you said table, but it doesn't even have to be a table.
Doesn't have to be a table. You could be picnic, could be the car, could be wherever you have togetherness. Togetherness, we have to unpack that construct and say this is about relationship and not a physical seating. If we understand that, okay, so if say you're a daycare provider and you say, okay, food must serve togetherness, what do? Well, the old adage that we need to eat together, eat together, eat together. You see this everywhere, food and nutrition guides, we need to eat together. But that places food before togetherness. It's not eating together. It's gathering first and then eating. Gather. Is there relationship? Is there receptivity? You may be in charge of feeding kids as a childcare provider, but that doesn't mean they're attached to you. Doesn't mean they're receptive to you. Their tummies don't work. They'll get tummy aches. They'll refuse your food. Do you have relationship? What do you need to get relationship so you can get receptivity? Gather first, then eat, because that's the order that nature meant it to come. And finally is to understand that food can't serve 2 masters here at one time. This was actually quite remarkable when I saw it, that food can serve togetherness and can bring us, when served in the context of togetherness, and food is delivered this way through relationship, it can enhance bonds, it can tie us together, it can be a sense of intimacy that develops. But if food is served in a way that does not serve togetherness, it automatically lends itself to serve emotional distress, from overeating to not eating, whatever the situation might be. Our stomachs don't work. We can use food as an anesthetic with emotional eating. But as soon as you put this back into relationship, we have our answers. So it's always important that we think about context first. We think about relationship first before we go to take care of someone through food. Do we have their heart? Do they trust us? What do we need to do to represent ourselves as a caretaker here to somebody? Don't assume
Amazing.
because you get paid for it and that's your role and responsibility that you have that. You don't. We need to build that relationship first.
Wow. So the conversation's now really building. Elena said this conversation's making me reflect on the most recent meal that I had with my son for dinner, and it's making me look forward to the next meal. I think that probably really warms your heart, Deborah. Let's invite Jacob back on now, and as we say goodbye to everyone, because I realize it's 8 o'clock now. But Deborah, thank you so much for this book, for doing all of that work for us. And I hope you continue to hear from people about how it's changing their lives and raising questions for them. And Jacob, don't we love Banyan, Deborah? I mean, does all of us, don't we love Banyan?
Favorite bookstore.
As we sign off, Jacob, thank you to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, no, your audio. You have to unmute yourself, Jacob.
There, you can hear me now. Sorry. Yeah, that was if I can just say quickly that that was really, really powerful just for me, just listening. And as Deborah knows, I have 2 children, and it's so relevant. And I just wanted to say this quick thing. I was listening to this Leonard Cohen interview recently, and he was talking about how he said at a certain point, all you want to hear is in a song is like how one person tries to love somebody else, something like that. And I was thinking that like every story, every movie you watch is really about that. It's just about how somebody tries to love somebody else and how they fail in that, how they succeed, and or how they overcome and their own obstacles. And so you've really made the story, you've shown that the story of food is that. And I've honestly never seen that before. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant, Deborah.
Thank you.
And thank you on behalf of Banyan Books. And to let everyone know, you can get the book Nourished at banyan.com. You can find out more about Deborah's work at MacNamara.ca. And you can find out about Maria's work at marialerose.com.
Or CA, both work. Thank you,
work.
everyone.
Thank
go
you.
forward and gather and then eat. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.